Guys, I did it. I pulled a Barbenheimer double feature. I did it. Spent the whole day in the cinema. Watched Oppenheimer, followed by Barbie. And I will say, it really felt good to watch two movies in the theater, back to back, with a packed audience, and two movies, say what you will, both of them have integrity. It's a very low bar to me. Have integrity in your movies. That's where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. But I can gladly say both movies have integrity. This isn't some kind of manufactured product from Disney where it's the latest piece of content and everything feels like a decision by committee. This isn't it. It really felt like I went to the cinema and did a really good double feature. I can't remember the last time I did something like this. The last time was 2019. I remember in 2019, I lived in Maine, and I was like, fuck, I'm missing all of these great movies. And when I went to Montreal, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do one day and watch all the good movies I can. I did a triple feature, Parasite, Uncut Gems, Lighthouse. It wasn't that good, this double feature. That was like one for the books, but yeah. Let's just talk about both movies. I like both quite a bit. They're both a 7 out of 10 for me. They're on the same level in terms of enjoyment for me. I will say which one I prefer at the end, so stay tuned till the end. I'm going to start off with Oppenheimer because that's the first one that I watched. I watched it in 70mm film. I will say something about the 70mm film experience. This is the first time I watch a movie on film. I've always lived in small towns, so I've never had the luxury of going to see a movie on film, given how few film projectors there are left out there. I thought the image was a little flickery. Please tell me in the comments below if you had a similar experience. I think it might have just been my projection, but every time there was like these highlights, the image was very flickery for me. So it kind of did detract from the experience for me. But just watching the grain and the real life scratches, that made it worth the ticket price at the end of the day. Just a few moments, especially in the black and white sequences, the very high highlights were like very flickery for me. So please tell me down below, because I want to experience it again, but I just want to know if that's part of the process or if it was just my projection. Anyway, Christopher Nolan. He released his last film, Tenet, during the COVID pandemic. I believe it was the year 2020 is when he released the movie Tenet. Not only was it a financial disappointment, which is understandable, a movie released during the pandemic, it was also a critical disappointment. I really liked the action sequences in Tenet. Everything else was a little lackluster for me. Sound mixing was all over the place. Characters were next to none. It was really just Christopher Nolan going a bit too high on the Christopher Nolan-isms, which is he has a passion for physics, he has a passion for science. You watch a movie like Inception or Interstellar, they're so loyal to what the scientific consensus is. And he really loves that about doing film. And I like him for that, but I feel like Tenet he just kind of leaned too far into that and forgot to make a compelling story. So here he is with his latest movie, Oppenheimer. Follows Cillian Murphy's character, Oppenheimer. True life story about the guy who made the atomic bomb. And what you get in this movie, in true Christopher Nolan fashion, is you're bouncing around from different set pieces and different periods of time. You're following Oppenheimer as he creates the atom bomb. There's a courtroom hearing with Robert Downey Jr.'s character, then a courtroom hearing with Cillian Murphy's character, and you have Cillian Murphy as an apprentice learning the physics behind what he's about to do. So you're kind of bouncing around from a ton of different moments in the story. Movie is not told in a linear fashion, which is what Christopher Nolan is known for. And I will say, after watching Tenet, this is the smartest movie that Christopher Nolan can do. Because Tenet was so cold on character And Oppenheimer seems to be the opposite. He kind of put the spectacle back. It's not as big of a spectacle movie. The budget is a lot lower compared to his other movies, but it's a lot more character driven. And I've talked about Christopher Nolan plenty on this channel before. I've always thought he struggled with emotion. He struggled in Inception when it came to the relationship between DiCaprio and Marion Cotillard. I thought he struggled in the more schmaltzy scenes in Interstellar, especially those involving Anne Hathaway. Those never worked for me. And here, he's starting to get a grasp of how to do that. He's an old British man who drinks tea, Earl Grey tea if I had to guess. He's a very cold person, and I felt like there was a bit more of that emotion in this movie. There's a bit more moments where I was like, oof, that I felt something there. Technically, as you would expect from a Christopher Nolan movie, very beautiful, IMAX resolution, very crisp cinematography, a lot of Terrence Malick-y moments where you're just looking at imagery that doesn't really go with the story but evokes a certain emotion. Sound here, guys, I'm glad to say you can understand the dialogue. Soundtrack is beautiful. You don't get Hans Zimmer this time around. You get the Johannes Gorgson, however you fucking say his name, but the Black Panther guy. He also did Tenet, and I think it's equally good as what you would get from a Hans Zimmer score. The standout here is Cillian Murphy's performance, and as I said, this is a more character-oriented piece, and Cillian Murphy really is probably the best performance I've seen out of a Christopher Nolan movie. So much subtlety in his performance. You look at his eyes and you can tell what's going on. He reminds me a lot of someone like a Joaquin Phoenix, or back in the day you had Paul Newman. Just these actors that have these very piercing eyes, and you can just tell what the character is going through just by looking at them in their eyes. And obviously Cillian Murphy did a body transformation in order to get into the role, but I don't even think that is what transported me as much. It was just the raw performance, scenes where he's contemplating. I feel like the movie has a very quick pace, and what the movie does well is that Cillian Murphy, the stresses that he has from one scene carry over into the next scene, carry over into the next scene, carry over into the next scene, and you're just like creating a giant ball of anxiety just through the performance of Cillian Murphy. Other performances I liked Matt Damon a lot, and I thought the best moments of the movie are when you have this kind of unlikely kinship between Matt Damon and Cillian Murphy, who Cillian Murphy is kind of more of your passive character, and Matt Damon is a bit more of your trigger-happy kind of character, and that dichotomy really works for me. It also creates a lot of humor between the two, some good funny bits between them, few and far between, but appropriate when they do appear. This movie does have a stacked cast, and not all of the performances did work for me. Rami Malek kind of felt out of nowhere in this movie. Florence Pugh, I feel like as an actress, she just doesn't do it for me. I feel like there's just something missing in her performance every time I see her in a movie like Midsommar or like Little Women. I always feel like I want her to be a bit more versatile with the performance. I feel like she's a very one-note kind of person. I thought Gary Oldman in the movie was doing a bit too much of a caricature. It felt a bit cartoony, and you are perceiving the events through the eyes of Oppenheimer, so you could argue this is just how Oppenheimer perceives this character. I thought it was just a bit too overboard, if I do say so myself. A lot of the screen time is devoted to Robert Downey Jr., Cillian Murphy, and Matt Damon. They deliver. As well as Emily Blunt, by the way, who I think she's good as well. This is really the first time I see Christopher Nolan really try to dive into character and really do like more abstract stuff. Like I said, there's that kind of Terrence Malick vibe going on. There's this sex scene, spoiler alert, this is spoilers for both movies, by the way, but there's this sex scene where he talks about having an affair, and Emily Blunt is looking at Cillian Murphy and picturing him having sex with Florence Pugh's character. There's also this really great scene, and I think it's the best scene of the movie, where Cillian Murphy is like kind of picturing people's faces melting, walking on corpses, the loud bang of the atom bomb. That scene was very well done, in my opinion. It kind of reminded me of this kind of recent trend of horror biopics. You had the Blonde movie, the Marilyn Monroe movie, which most people disliked. I liked it. And you had the Spencer movie, the Princess Diana movie. They all feel like biopics, but they use horror elements in order to get into the psyche of the protagonist. And I think Oppenheimer does that, not to as an effective degree as the previous two movies I mentioned, but still does it quite well. Is this the greatest Christopher Nolan movie? I'm seeing that a lot on the internet. No. Memento is still my favorite, probably. I also do prefer Interstellar over this movie, and I'd say I'd rather The Dark Knight. There are a few Christopher Nolans I prefer over this one. This is, however, a good direction, and a direction that I think was much needed for Christopher Nolan. Some other negatives I had, other than a few performances I thought were questionable at times. I feel like the third act, the movie goes from this science race movie and turns into this courtroom drama. And when it did that shift, not only did I know in which direction it was going in, and when the reveal happened, I wasn't too surprised. I feel like it detracted from the psyche of what was going on in Oppenheimer's head, because a lot of that screen time is devoted to other characters who were witness to the events, most notably RDJ. So I feel like when you did that gear shift, it's like I wanted more of Oppenheimer, but you got a lot of this storyline. Not only that, but you get a lot of characters throughout the film, and I feel like you could have downplayed a few of these characters in order to get more Oppenheimer, because after a while my brain was just trying to keep track of who's doing what, who's on whose side, and it's kind of the point. You're getting a Cold War paranoia movie, but it did detract from what I think was most interesting about the movie, which was Cillian Murphy, his performance, his character, and that internal trauma he's trying to hide from the world. That said, the courtroom drama all pays off at the very final scene, like where the movie chooses to leave you hanging. That was a perfect ending. And Christopher Nolan, he knows how to end a movie with you wanting more, whether it's the top spinning in Inception or even the ending of the Dark Knight trilogy. I thought was a very good ending. He knows how to end something with wow, it leaves an impression. And the way this movie ends is so fucking perfect. And throughout the movie, there's these really gripping, anxiety-inducing scenes, like the scene where they're testing the atom bomb in the middle of the desert, and you just don't know if it's gonna blow the whole thing up. You know, because we're still around. We're not dead. It didn't kill all of humanity. But the characters are constantly saying, there's a chance it might kill everyone. And you're like, oh shit. And it's just so anxiety-inducing. And the bomb that was so promoted by the advertisement, it did not disappoint. It was really satisfying to watch. Well, not satisfying, but it was a very impactful moment throughout the film. So I think Oppenheimer, I have my complaints about it. I think it could have been a tighter movie. I think it could have focused a bit more on what was going on in Oppenheimer's head. Where the movie ends and he says, this is the point of no return, and you realize that this was all Oppenheimer trying to prevent this from escalating quickly. I get what they were trying to do with the courtroom scenes, but it did detract from the internal drama that was going on in Oppenheimer. So, yeah, 7 out of 10. I thought this movie was really good. Not quite my favorite of the year so far. There are a few movies I thought were better than this movie. For one, I think I preferred Past Lives, but a welcome movie for the summer. Let's move on to Barbie. I'm a Barbie girl in the Barbie world. Greta Gerwig, she's a director. I haven't really liked many of her movies. She started off with Lady Bird. Well, before that, she was collaborating a lot with Noah Baumbach, who, again, is a director. He does movies, and they're just not my type. Greenberg is the one that comes to mind, but he does all these very indie movies that are subject to parody of when you go think of a fucking 2000s indie movie, you think of a Noah Baumbach movie or a Richard Linklater movie. Started off there and then moved on to directing her own shit. Lady Bird. I do not like Lady Bird. I'm that one guy who does not like Lady Bird. Maybe it's because I'm Middle Eastern and my parents are Middle Eastern. And if I told my mom to shut up, she would take her fucking shahata and throw it across the room and slap me in the back of the head with it. So when I see movies with white kids talking back at their parents, I'm like, there's a plot hole in this movie. Where's the fucking slipper? And Little Women, it's a good story. It's a timeless story. I don't really think Greta Gerwig's directing added much to the movie. It's an adaptation. So when she came out with this movie, a lot of people were like, oh, Greta Gerwig, she's the greatest thing ever. And I was like, not my cup of tea, let's say. This movie has been through development hell. It was originally supposed to be a movie starring Amy Schumer, which thank God it wasn't. It was going to star Amy Schumer as an ugly Barbie who just wants to be a scientist. And prior to this movie's release, the screenwriter of that original Barbie movie talked out against this Barbie movie, talking about how I just didn't want to make another feminist go punch the patriarchy movie, bro. Which, I don't know, just judging by the premise of an ugly Amy Schumer Barbie who wants to be an inventor, I think you were kind of making that inadvertently already. So I had the lowest of expectations going into this movie. My theater was packed. Everyone was dressed in pink. I felt a little underdressed because I kind of just went like this. Everyone was wearing pink. I will say, this movie really took me by surprise, and I really, really like this movie. First of all, it's just the style of the movie. It's so eye-captivating. It's one of the most visually beautiful movies I've seen in a long, long time. And that's what I mean. Both Oppenheimer and Barbie have that craftsmanship. But Oppenheimer uses it to immerse you into the movie. But Barbie, it knows it's a movie. And it looks like a soundstage. It just looks like a studio. But that's part of the charm, is how much it just looks like a studio. Like, it's the best looking craft you can see. Is all these fucking costumes and set design and buildings and props. The props in this are really well designed. All of that stuff really contribute to a beautiful looking movie. Really reminded me of something like The Wizard of Oz, where it's just, you look at it and you know it's fake, but you're so transported into this world, this fictional world, but it feels so tangible but so artificial at the same time, which is very appropriate for a movie about Barbies. That visual style also carries over to the humor, and I think the best humor in this movie is when the visuals complement the humor. There's a scene where Ken is digging through Barbie's clothes and throwing them out the window, and when he throws them out the window, they freeze frame in the camera. They show what model it is, and then it lands. Just little moments like that. There's that moment in the trailer where they're teleporting or traveling to the real world, and they're going by bicycle, and then rollerblading, and then rocket ships, and it's done in this very quick cut fashion, whereas you're getting this shot that's a perfect profile of the characters. Kind of reminded me of Beau is Afraid. That movie did it as well, when Beau goes to the theater in the forest. It really reminded me of that, which I'm sure when Greta Gerwig watched Beau is Afraid, she was like, shit, I thought of that. Fuck, he did it first. Yeah, so the visuals really worked. Musical numbers as well, very good. This movie feels like a very American movie, with the big sets, the big extravagant style, the fucking overload of color, the big moments of brawls and musical numbers. It really felt like I was watching an old-fashioned American movie, like Wizard of Oz, or like Singing in the Rain, or An American in Paris. Those kinds of movies. A lot of the visual gags as well reminded me of An American in Paris. A lot of Mary Poppins kind of moments as well sprinkled in there. It just felt like a comfy, good old-fashioned American movie. The movie is very thin on story. When I saw the trailer, I was really worried about that. I was like, this kind of just looks like another Lego movie, which I'm not too interested in. I don't want to see another movie about a toy that goes to the real world to visit Will Ferrell. It's been done before. I think the fact that it's so thin on story is still a detriment to the film at the end of the day, and it does kind of create a bit of an unfocused feeling. That said, it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I think the whole movie was really good at handling the subject of Barbie, because so many people perceive Barbie in a different way. And I think the problem with the Amy Schumer version that we never got was that it was just a bit too critical of Barbie. Because to some, Barbie is a very empowering figure. To others, she's very sexualized. To others, she creates this unobtainable beauty standard. And the movie does explore every perspective on how the world looks at Barbie. You have the daughter character, for instance, in this movie, who's kind of going through this rebellious teen phase, and she views Barbie as being very outdated and a thing of the past, and very detrimental to women. Mattel just views her as something for profit and just wants to profit off of Barbie. Ken just views her as an object of sexualization. So it's just, you're getting all of these perspectives on Barbie. Meanwhile, Barbie is just someone who just likes pink. That's just who she is, you know? The humor worked in this movie. It's a very funny movie, and it's rare that I laugh so consistently throughout movies these days. But again, that visual style, it really reminded me of Edgar Wright comedy, where the visuals just add so much to the humor. The movie doesn't even feel constrained by the format of film, doesn't feel like it has to stay within the narrative. There will be like Family Guy style cutaway gags. One moment in particular I liked is when Barbie's all depressed and she's all crying, and then they cut away to like a fake commercial of a depressed Barbie. I thought that moment was very good. There's these little gags in the movie that are kind of in the background as well. They don't take too much focus. One moment like that would be at the beginning when Barbie is going through her morning routine and something is just a little off, and the music in the background is just kind of like reflecting what's going on in the movie. Not all the humor worked. There were a couple of fourth wall breaks I thought were kind of just ill-fitting. They do a joke about how Barbie feels ugly, and it's this very poignant scene. And then they have Helen Mirren, who's the narrator, say, "Oh, it's really hard because we cast Margot Robbie," or some shit like that. She says a joke, and it just took me out of the moment. It was one of those Marvel-y moments where I'm like, it just takes me out of the movie when you put a joke at the wrong time like that. And there are a few moments like that where they just kind of I want them to lay into the emotion a bit more, but they don't. There is a part in the middle where the movie sagged as well. When they finally get to the real world, you're in this glitzy, glamorous Barbie world with a bunch of pink and all these extravagant characters, and all of a sudden you're in the real world and it just feels very bland. And I kind of felt like the audience energy kind of dipped throughout that part as well. Also, the Mattel scenes, they didn't quite work for me. It has that kind of disease that American comedies tend to have, where they just keep the camera rolling a bit too long throughout improv moments, and they just don't quite work in the movie. One that I think back to, and it's in the trailer, they're talking about having a beach off, and they're talking about beaching each other off and shit like that. It just doesn't work for me. I kind of wish it had so much going for it with the visual comedy. It didn't need that extra SNL style improv comedy. Let's talk about the politics of the movie, because it's kind of a subject of debate on the internet, is whether or not this movie is too political or not. And I'm usually someone who's very sensitive to that, someone who doesn't like politics in the movies. And if you don't want to see this movie because you don't want to see the word patriarchy said 50 times, I totally get it. Listen, I used to live in Bangor, Maine. I've never heard the word patriarchy. And then I moved to Toronto, and sometimes I go to film school in Toronto. Guys, you have to sympathize with me. I go to film school with Toronto. The amount of dumb, politically correct shit I hear on a daily basis is fucking crazy. Okay? I get it. If you don't want to see this movie because you're just fucking tired of that shit, trust me, I get it. It's fine. You don't watch it. This isn't gonna win you over. That said, I watched this movie getting in mind that I'm gonna watch something like a Mean Girls, a Legally Blonde, a Miss Congeniality. I knew I was gonna get my girl power moments, or I'm gonna get my fuck you men moments. I understood that. They have a target audience. It's 25-year-old women. I'd say like 18 to 25-year-old women is the target audience. And at the end of the day, it's a chick flick. I kind of expect the girl power moments, fuck the patriarchy moments. I will say I wish they used another word, but other than patriarchy, because I didn't know what that word meant 6 months ago, probably. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience, maybe not in Toronto, but in like other areas of the world who are just gonna be like, what, patriarchy? They could have just shown it rather than told it. I do think sometimes the politics did overstep into a point of preachiness. There's one moment where they're driving and it's established that the little girl thinks that Barbie is crazy, and she says, "Oh, I'm so happy they finally arrested that nut job. I mean, reality challenged person." And it's not played for a joke. From what I got, it wasn't played for a joke, and they just kind of do it like that. There is also a moment in the end where they kind of like throw this jab at like, oh, we'll make Barbie land normal when the real world is normal kind of thing. And I feel like they didn't have to go in that direction. But those are like tiny nitpicks at the end of the day. I was just so captivated by the musical numbers, the style, the costumes, the performances as well. I really liked Ryan Gosling. He's the scene stealer in this movie. And for the people complaining about that whole patriarchy subplot on how they make men look stupid, I didn't really quite get that personally from watching the movie, because Ken is established as a very stupid character. So when he goes into the real life library and gets all these books and takes them to Barbie Land, he's obviously reading them at a very surface level because it's established in his character. So it's normal that the things he gets from these books are like, oh, I have to like beer, and women have to wear fucking maid outfits and stuff like that. One other thing that did kind of piss me off, but this is more of a plot thing rather than a political thing, but they kind of intertwine with one another, is it's established that Ken took that information, used it to brainwash the people of Barbie Land, and it kind of had this propaganda-y kind of feel. And then Barbie's solution to the problem is to use America Ferrera's character as propaganda as well. So the whole movie, I'm like, wait, she's just kind of fighting propaganda with propaganda. And it just didn't quite work for me. But again, like, those are more, I viewed them more as plot issues rather than cringy kind of political moments, which usually take me out of the movie. It worked for me in this movie, given the context that, first of all, Barbie is already politicized. Second of all, it's a chick flick. I expect there to be some kind of pro-feministy kind of message. Again, I get it if that's not what you're going to the theater for. I wouldn't recommend this movie for my dad because it's just going to be like, what is this? More feminist bullshit? I get it. But it worked for me in this movie because I kind of went in knowing what to expect. I really liked Barbie. 7 out of 10. Pretty solid movie. If I had to pick Barbie or Oppenheimer, to me they're two really good movies. They achieve what they want to do with a few detriments to each respective movie. And again, like I said, it's two movies with a lot of craftsmanship that use that craftsmanship in very different ways. I feel like Barbie had high highs and low lows, and I feel like Oppenheimer had high highs, but a lot of moments of just flatlining. If I had to watch one again, I think I'd go with Barbie, just because of how fun it felt. It's a fun movie to just throw on and just admire the craftsmanship, admire the choreography, get a couple of jokes out of the way. But obviously it's not hitting on a same emotional impactful level as Oppenheimer. And I always kind of gravitated more towards that American style movie rather than that European style movie. And Oppenheimer, given its like admiration for like Terrence Malick and that kind of more emotional film. It does fall into that more European feel, whereas Barbie is like 100% just pure apple pie America movie. So for that, I think I like Barbie just because of my natural tendency to like the American style filmmaking more. But tell me, what do you think? Which movie do you prefer? Comment below, let me know. Please don't tear me a new asshole, and I'll see you guys around.